Hey, what's up? Serena Pia here from thriftdiving.com, and in this video I'm going to share with you how to make a DIY Tic Tac Toe board, but this one's a little different. Not only can you store the pieces inside, but you can store your favorite snacks. So when you and the kids are playing, you've got all your favorite foods. I'm also going to be using some of my most favorite arrow fastener tools. So let's jump into this project right now. You can find the blog post down below with the materials list. We're going to start off with cutting the pieces we need. This is 1/2-inch birch plywood, has a really nice finish, and we're going to use a jigsaw. This is a really easy tool to use to cut all of your pieces. So feel free to use a jigsaw and cut the pieces for the top, but then you're also going to cut the pieces for the bottom. Lots of little pieces, but I'll show you how to put it all together. The blog post that goes with this project has a PDF template for you to download and print with these X's and O's. We'll do 5 X's and 5 O's. I'm also going to be using some scrap walnut. A friend of mine was doing a project and just had some extra, and I thought this would be great for the X's. I'm going to cover them in some painter's tape, and then I'm going to use a little bit of spray adhesive to attach it to the tape. When I'm cutting these out, it makes it really easy to peel that back and not damage the wood. To cut these X's and O's, you can use a scroll saw or you can use the jigsaw that you use to cut out the pieces of the body. I am liking using the scroll saw because it's just sort of a new tool that I discovered, and it's very much like a sewing machine. It's a lot of fun to use. So when I was done cutting those out, I peeled them off, set them aside, and now it was time to do the O's. These can be a little bit more challenging even if you're using a scroll saw or a jigsaw, because you'll need to cut out the center portion. So in that case, what you'd have to do is just drill a hole, get that blade in the middle of the hole, and then cut out the excess. And once you do that, you now have an O. So moving on to the next step, it's time to sand these down to make sure it's smooth. You'll notice that the O's are made out of plywood, and I used 3/4-inch plywood because I wanted the O's to look visually different from the X's in terms of their color. I just think it looks better. And then I just used a light finishing oil to finish those off. Now, edge banding is the next step, and this is important when you want a nice finished look. Edge banding can be applied with an iron. I know there's more sophisticated ways to apply it, but generally in the DIY world, we use an iron, and it helps to cover that raw edge of plywood that makes things look unfinished. And we want this to look finished. So we're going to take a knife and just score the edge banding and make sure that it just snaps off there, and use an extra little razor blade to remove any excess, and then we're going to sand it smooth, and you'll see that it looks pretty good. So if you want a project that looks finished and not with raw edges, definitely use edge banding. The next step is to take this 12 by 12 square, which is going to be the top, and mark the 4-inch mark and the 8-inch mark, because this is where we're going to create a grid, and we want it to be even, right? We don't want to have the grid crooked. So at the 4-inch and at the 8-inch, I was able to apply tape in order to create about a 1/4-inch grid. And just using craft paint, very carefully, I painted it, made sure it didn't seep underneath of the tape, and then it was time to move on to the finishing. I decided to use a stain and finishing oil in one. I wanted something that would not be too shiny, but I also wanted to protect that paint that we just applied to the wood. So I did 2 coats, let it dry for about 15 minutes, and then wiped it off. And I know I went back and added a second coat, but then the strangest thing happened. When I flipped the board over, I realized the back had a really nice grain pattern, and I liked the way this looked. So I ended up creating a completely separate grid on the back and decided that this would be the top and the other side would be the bottom. I also applied coats of the stain and finishing oil to the rest of the pieces and sanded in between. The next step was to start constructing the inside of this tic-tac-toe board, and we were going to use velvet flocking, but we also needed our arrow fastener hot glue gun. So I turned that on, got that ready, and then started applying this velvet flocking. Thankfully, it had a peel-off backing, and it was pretty easy to attach. Just making sure that you had your utility knife to peel away the excess, and be very careful, because if you tear this, it's not going to have a nice, clean, flush edge. So just take this part very, very carefully, peel it away, and move on to the next piece. Some of the reviews for this velvet flocking said that they really thought glue would be more helpful than just having the sticky back. So I decided to test out adding a little bit of hot glue to the back of the board and then pressing it onto the velvet flocking. Just be very careful. You want to make sure there's no hard, dried glue bumps underneath of the velvet flocking. You'll see that I use flocking for the interior of the lid here, but I'm also using a hot glue gun in order to keep these pieces in place before I can actually nail them together. And that's perfect for doing a lot of DIY projects and having a hot glue gun because you can keep your project pieces together before you permanently secure them. For this project, we're using an Arrow Fastener T50 Elite, which is a stapler, but it's also a brad nailer, and it can shoot brad nails up to 1 inch. So I wanted to give this a try to see if I could use this versus something that's more heavy duty, like a pneumatic brad nailer, which Arrow does provide in their list of tools. So if you're someone that doesn't have the budget or the comfort or the resources to be able to afford a compressor or a pneumatic brad nailer, the T50 Elite is an option for you to complete different projects, especially ones that involve wood. So as this box started to take shape, it looked beautiful. The color was amazing. The flocking made it feel like a jewelry box, and I was ready to move on to the center part, the partitions. Here's where I ran into some problems though, and this is why when you're planning a project, you really have to think about each step beforehand. So as I began putting pieces inside of the box, I realized I hadn't planned for how I was going to attach those partitions to the center support. So I ended up using my hot glue gun to temporarily attach them to the center partition, and then on the back side, use the brad nailer to attach it. Once those were attached, I ended up adding more flocking to cover up those brad nails and then slide the contraption back into the box. So when doing DIY projects, definitely think about how everything's going to be attached. You'll find instructions down below in the blog post to walk you through how to make sure this is done properly. You'll see on the back I don't have edge banding because I ran out, but those things happen. Moving on to the latches and to the hinges, we were ready to complete this box. So now it was time for adding all the treats and snacks and putting the pieces in there and letting my kids play and eat the snacks. So if you're looking for a project that's fun to make, something that you can take along with you, something that you can just have fun with the kids, with your family, then definitely download these instructions from Arrow Fastener's blog, and you can find me at thriftdiving.com. I'm Serena Apia, and I will see you next project.